In 1994, the concept of human security refocused debate from protecting territory to protecting people and what we care about most: our basic needs, our physical integrity, our human dignity, so everyone could live free from want, fear, and indignity. As a byproduct of how we've pursued development, a new generation of threats has emerged, including inequality, digital dangers, health challenges, and violent conflict. What has become clear since 1994 is that we live in the Anthropocene, a new geological epoch where the pressures exerted by people are influencing the planet's climate and ecosystems, increasing the risk of food insecurity, disasters, and zoonotic diseases, creating new problems and making existing ones worse. The severity of these threats and the fragility of our development gains has created a spiral of human insecurity. Even before COVID, 6 in 7 people across the world, including developed countries, felt insecure. Trust between each other is in decline, and fragmented and protectionist approaches, unable to solve the interconnected challenges, are resulting in further insecurity and protectionism. How can we break the spiral as we tackle these threats and recover the 5 years of development lost to COVID-19? The interconnected threats we face demand a new approach to human security in the Anthropocene. A community can only be secure if adjacent communities and natural systems are too. New threats to human security in the Anthropocene calls for a greater focus on solidarity and agency in policymaking. We must expand the human security concept to consider not just interdependence across people, but also between people and the planet, and create the trust needed for people to collaborate in solving humanity's greatest challenges.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for being part of the global launch of the 2022 Special Report on Global Security. My name is Femi Oke. I am your moderator, your guide for the next 90 minutes. Let me tell you what we are going to be doing. We're going to be focusing on a new approach to human security. You will hear high-level speakers make the case for this new approach, why it is important, what are the possibilities if we reframe the way that we have thought about human security, the way that we could be thinking about human security. We will also be talking to a panel about their key takeaways, the utility of reframing human security. You will hear some highlights, some key takeaways also from the report. And in this conversation will be you. Your comments, your questions are very welcome. We have a big audience, so I know you will want to talk in the comment section. That is absolutely fine. Your specific questions, it will really help me if you put them in the Q&A section. That means that you and I and all of our speakers can be in this conversation together. I'm looking forward to that happening. This global launch of the special report on human security will be available in English, in French, and also Spanish. If you'd like to hear the launch in French or Spanish, just have a look at the little globe at the bottom of your dashboard. Click on that and you should be able to hear me speaking perfect French or perfect Spanish. I have one more note before we officially start. This is a global launch of a special report, the 2022 report on human security. It is not the Human Development Report, as famous as it is. Today, our focus is on human security. You're still here. I'm glad, I know, because you care. So we start with the UNDP Administrator Achim Steiner. Achim, where would you like us to start? What is the most important thing that we'd like to do as you officially welcome our global launch audience?
Thank you, Femi, and welcome to all those who have joined us for this launch. Let me in particular also recognize the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, Yoshimasa Hayashi, who will address us in a moment through a message, but also President Laura Chinchilla, Senator Keizo Takemi, who both have been very much with our Human Development Report team at the heart of driving this new exploration of human security. So, Femi, the last Human Development Report, since you referred to it, provided us with a new way to look at the world. With its focus on the Anthropocene, or this notion of moving from the Holocene to a new geological age, the age of humans, it showed how humans have become a dominant force, shaping our planet in increasingly dangerous ways. So perhaps more importantly, the report also carried an empowering message. It's not just a dystopian perspective that the notion of the Anthropocene generates. In fact, what it says is if we have the power to create a new geological era, then surely we have the power to also choose different pathways in how to move forward. And it made a call to action to set people and planet on a new course. And to navigate this new course, I think what we really need is to add that new lens that illuminates development blind spots, transcending from a notion of security that is very territorially focused, which was the origins also of the human security concept, to that lens of human security, which encompasses a far broader set of indicators, but also possibilities to act. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights originally set out freedom from want and freedom from fear as people's highest aspirations. It's a reminder that the DNA of the notion of human security is not something that we only invented recently. In fact, it has a long tradition in culture, in thinking, but also in the aspiration of how people wish to address insecurity. But humanity's pursuit of both freedom from want and freedom from fear is increasingly falling short. As the 2020 Human Development Report laid out, remarkable progress in human development has lifted millions, in fact, billions of people out of poverty. But in doing so, a collision course has been set between people and planet. This is the challenge of our time. The seismic shifts occurring as a result from increased climate change to the rise of zoonotic diseases threatens decades of progress. The unprecedented decline in the Human Development Index values caused by COVID-19 today is just one consequence. Life expectancy, our gold standard measure of global health, has declined 2 years running in the wake of COVID-19. This has not happened before in our lifetimes. And people are sensing it. Fear is spreading. You have heard the UN Secretary General repeatedly speaking to this growing sense of insecurity, most recently also about the epidemic of coups as symptoms of this condition. And the number of forcibly displaced people, refugees, internally displaced people, has increased twofold over the past decade. This is supposedly in the post-Cold War peace dividend era. And as this special report, this new threats to human security in the Anthropocene demanding greater solidarity sets out, I believe we need to refresh and reimagine our understanding of not only where conflict occurs, but also why conflict is part of our lives. Some 1.2 billion people now live in conflict-affected areas, with a remarkable half of them in countries that are usually not considered to be fragile. These are extraordinary numbers in the year 2022. And all this while global military spending has reached its highest level since the end of the Cold War, almost $2 trillion in the year 2020, and 20 times more, just to give one reference, than official development assistance. So while economics tells us we are the wealthiest generation and military spending would suggest that we should be more secure than ever, the reality is very different, as the report shows. And if human security is defined by freedom from want, freedom from fear, as well as freedom from indignity, then I think it is safe to say that humanity is moving in the wrong direction. The question we have explored through this research is how, in this new age, the concept of human security can help us to realize our common agenda and deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. We have articulated the direction and the destination, but we are deviating from it in increasingly profound ways. But perhaps it also helps, and that's what the report does, to understand why people feel insecure. Because the asymmetry between what the data tells us we should feel and where people are saying what they feel is increasingly drastic and dramatic. Just before the COVID-19 pandemic, and as the world reached unprecedented development levels, if just measured in global wealth, well over $400 trillion, 6 out of every 7 people worldwide felt insecure. That's based on a new experimental index that we developed for this report using data that covers 80% of the world's population. So this is not just a small sample. People reported feeling insecure for a combination of reasons, because their lives are obviously in different circumstances, but they're unified by that growing sense of insecurity. It could be the fear of finding enough food to eat, of losing a job, of a terrorist attack, or many other factors. Moreover, insecurity is strongly associated with low interpersonal trust, a key enabler of cooperation. And don't we recognize it in the midst of this pandemic, all around us? Human insecurity is a common concern across countries at all levels of development. And since the aftermath of the global financial crisis, it has in fact increased for most countries with comparable data, and perhaps counterintuitive, some of the largest increases in the very high human development countries, i.e. those who would, one assume, be in the best position to address insecurity. There is a dark logic to this data. It suggests that though humanity's model of progress has delivered in some areas, people are more worried about their future. And it is beginning to become a corrosive force in our societies. We are at an understandable moment of fear and uncertainty where some of the systems people have relied on have failed to deliver, but have yet to be succeeded by something better. That, I believe, is where the concept of the Anthropocene is so fundamental. And this is what is different today to when we first explored the idea of human security in 1994. With the understanding that today we live in the age of humans, where humans are the dominant force shaping the planet, comes also this notion of true agency, the ability to choose, to pursue different pathways. We are the first generation of the Anthropocene, and with that also comes the choice and the ability to change. In 1994, the human security concept offered a new lens on the meaning of security, and we will explore this with our wonderful fellow panelists today, introducing the importance of securing not just territories, borders, and places, but people, rights, and freedoms. Today, as we take on the existential threats of the Anthropocene, this lens on security must not only be remembered and prioritized, I think it needs to be matured and drive our thinking, our collective thinking, including that of collective security. Because the unifying factor in the challenges we face is their disregard for geographical borders and nation states. There's another crucial difference between human security as understood in 1994 and as it manifests today. Back then, it was a concept that was focusing particularly on developing countries in order to enable them to think about their own accelerated development pathways. Today, it applies to all countries. Climate change and COVID-19 are perfect illustrations of how insecure all nations have become. What remains different, however, are countries' abilities to act. Let me just briefly reference three challenges: vaccine equity in the face of COVID-19, decarbonization, and digitalization. For any to be effective, I believe a human security lens matched with global solidarity will be critical. A failure in human security is unfolding right now, but it is within our collective powers to address it. Booster after booster is being given in developed countries, while millions of people in developing countries are unprotected, prolonging everywhere the misery of this pandemic, prolonging the opportunity of COVID-19 to mutate. Yet we do see the seeds of solidarity being there, and they need to be tended. In the UN, we are proud to be part of the COVAX initiative, which was a brave and valiant effort trying to help everyone get access to COVID-19 vaccines. We didn't succeed in terms of where we would like to be by today, but nevertheless, it was one illustration of that beacon of solidarity that is available to us if we choose to use it. And by today, we have shipped over 1 billion vaccines. Perhaps in a pre-pandemic world, that would have been an extraordinary number. In the midst of a pandemic, it was both a desperate gesture and also an illustration of what vaccine inequity means in moments of crisis. It is when the world can fall apart. Enhanced solidarity that prepares more intentionally for also a decarbonized and digital future is essential. These are two of the great drivers of our age of transition and also of development pathways. They are in some ways the industrial revolutions of our time. They could cleave societies apart, or if the transition is fair and just, they could generate the solutions that will enable societies to flourish together as never before. Extraordinary breakthroughs await us, but we could also miss them. We have seen the human security implications of both, and this report looks at them in detail. Cybercrime, something that we wouldn't have thought about 20 years ago, has now increased by 600% during the pandemic alone, and social media That powerful way of connecting people has also turned into a weapon that sows distrust and division on almost every aspect of the fight against COVID and is used to be turning us against each other. This report outlines the grave consequences of continued inaction on climate change. It predicts that an additional 40 million people might die by the end of this century, even with moderate mitigation efforts to halt the steady march of our changing climate. But we've also seen the potential when the world works together. Painfully slow, but remarkably consistent, the progress in the way that the world has been brought together through the UN Climate Change Convention and the leadership, including by young people across the world, and last on display in Glasgow. Not enough, too slow, but imagine a world in which we didn't have a convention that enables us to tackle climate change as a unified community of nations. No Paris Agreement. Would we feel more secure in the year 2022? No, we wouldn't. And equally, we also have seen increased solidarity that is required to establish a vision for an inclusive digital world that safeguards human rights and doesn't only measure progress in terms of the next mile of fiber optic cable laid, but in fact, are people able to participate, empowered and supported to be part of this digital world? Just under half the world's population still has no access to broadband. It is going to be the great unequalizer of our time if we are not careful. And as the UN Secretary General in his Our Common Future report points out, humanity's welfare and indeed humanity's very future do depend on this notion of solidarity and working together as a global family to achieve common goals. This is solidarity not in the sense of charity, but in the sense of recognizing that in a world where climate change and viruses pay no heed to borders, no boundaries, we need to pay more attention to the security of our neighbors if we are to tackle the interconnected threats we now face for ourselves. That will allow people to escape the cages of anxiety or fear and dignity that prevent billions of people from grasping opportunities, overcoming poverty, seeking an education. At this perilous moment for people and planet, going alone is simply no longer an option. And I end, Femi, by saying that to those who might look to this report in many ways as perhaps parallel to what is unfolding every day in our evening news, I say to all of you, do not be misled by those who think that we can succeed in the 21st century against each other. We will fail. And the drums of war, the conflicts, the displacement, the misery, the suffering that is associated with the conflicts across the world today should actually be a reminder that it is when we lose solidarity, when we lose our humanity, we move into directions that perhaps we may not even be able to control anymore. And that is why this report matters. That is why we as a development program of the United Nations are so unequivocally appealing to the world to broaden that lens of understanding human security so that we can begin to work with one another rather than against each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Achim Steiner. We will come back to you in just a moment, but you share the duty of opening our global launch of the Human Security Special Report with His Excellency Yoshimasa Hayashi, Minister for Foreign Affairs in Japan.
Mr. Achim Steiner, Administrator of UNDP, distinguished participants, I would like to extend my heartfelt congratulations to UNDP on the global launch of its special report on human security, new threats to human security in the Anthropocene. 2 years have passed since the outbreak of COVID-19, but it is still raging around the world, threatening people's survival, livelihoods, and dignity. It is truly a human security crisis. As a country that has long advocated human security as a pillar of its diplomacy, Japan believes that now is the time to deepen discussions on human security, with a view to addressing the evolving threats of our era, such as the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. Accordingly, Japan has supported UNDP's discussions on the preparation of this special report since its inception. I would like to express my sincere appreciation for the efforts of the UNDP Human Development Report Office in completing this important, illuminating, and timely report, which calls for renewed strategy and concrete actions. In addition, I would like to acknowledge the contribution of the high-level advisory panel, which provided useful and insightful advice. The special report advocates the importance of solidarity in addition to the traditional two pillars of human security, namely protection and empowerment. In the Anthropocene, global issues such as climate change and infectious diseases transcend national boundaries, and that it is impossible for any one country to deal with them alone. It is essential for all countries to work together in solidarity. The recommendation of policy framework of the new generations of human security places the agency of individuals at the center of the three pillars of protection, empowerment, and solidarity, and promotes these three pillars in a spirit of trust. It underlies that the international community can only address transboundary challenges through cooperation, not by competition, among countries by overcoming their respective narrow interests. The special report also clearly reminds us that such a human security approach through the eyes of humankind is needed more than ever on our planet, which faces a critical juncture, including the COVID-19 pandemic. Based on the recommendation of this special report, Japan will further disseminate the concept of human security and promote its implementation through the United Nations Trust Fund for Human Security. In cooperation with the Group of Friends of Human Security, Japan will also contribute to discussions on human security in the United Nations and beyond, including at TICAD 8 to be held later this year. I thank you for your attention.
So let's make the case for a new generation of framing human security. Achim Steiner returns and joins us. We're also joined by Senator Takemi, who is one of the high-level panel co-chairs for an elite panel advisory board who are part of this process of how we got to where we are today with publishing this new human security report. So Senator Keizo Takemi, nice to have you here. And also President Laura Chinchilla, nice to have all three of you. So you make the case before we dig a little bit deeper and get some highlights from this report. Let's talk practicalities. Achim, I love that you said if you watch the news. So you're thinking about relevancy. President Chinchilla, the utility of what we learn from this human security report, what would you say it was to help us cope with these new challenges as we go forward?
Well, thank you very much, Femi. It is a pleasure and an honor to be part of this panel with these distinguished members, and of course with Administrator Steiner and Senator Takemi. Just let me start by saying, and my reflections will have to do more with the policy implications of this important effort. But let me start saying that I was appointed as Minister of Security of my country in 1994, the same year when UNDP introduced the human security approach, refocusing the security concept from territorial and state security to people's and human security. That new conceptual framework was really critical in helping me and many other decision makers in Latin America and in other countries to reform the security sector. However, although I can say that more than 25 years later, we have security and law enforcement institutions better aligned with the respect of the rule of law and human rights, it has not been enough. We still have in this region record figures of criminal violence and gender violence, among other kind of security problems. The new generation of human security provides policymakers with relevant conceptual and methodological innovations to respond to these pending challenges. It opens new venues to better understand the relationship between human development and human security. And let me highlight three significant contributions that in certain way have been already mentioned by the previous speakers. First, the report invites to rethink development strategies going beyond the concerns for individuals' well-being to consider their impact on the planet at large. In that sense, it highlights the notion of solidarity as an essential value to enrich our perspective on the relationship between development and security. So solidarity in the context we are living right now, in the era of the Anthropocene, implies to pursue human security through a holistic approach, capable to catch interdependence across and between people, nature, and the planet. The second important contribution, and I'm about to finish, is that the study helps to understand the interaction among different threats to development and human security. So that kind of interconnectedness of the existential risks is very important in designing policies. And finally, the study advocates for policies aimed at promoting agency. So along with solidarity and interconnectedness, agency becomes central to the new generation of human security. It is a way to leverage the protection of people through empowering them. So everything will have policy consequences that we can continue discussing during this conversation. Thank you.
Senator Takemi, I'm already seeing our audience thinking about health matters, and I have some questions for you about that that the audience would like to share with you. But I want to start with global health, and from the perspective of where you're sitting right now. When you look at the report, what can you extract that will help us with not just COVID-19, current pandemics, current health issues, but future ones as well?
Yes, I'm Keizo Takemi, and I'm also the WHO, the Goodwill Ambassador for Universal Health Coverage. Therefore, I consistently comment on those of the global health issues for many years. And yes, the health is indeed at the core part of the human security. And universal health coverage has been developed as an example of an international policy concept with a human security perspective in the health sector. Now, the universal health coverage is one of the goals of the SDGs. And the COVID-19 pandemic have also led many policymakers to think the vaccines as global public health goods, leading to establishing the accelerators and COVAX facilities, as the Achim mentions previously. And the framework for international cooperation. The pandemic has resulted in the loss of the millions of lives worldwide and has had these disastrous consequences. However, it has been my own view from the very beginning that this should not be dismissed as an unfortunate event, but as an opportunity to rethink the human security more deeply. And as a co-chair of the high-level advisory panel, I have repeatedly conveyed this view to UNDP in preparing this special report. The finalized The special report takes the COVID pandemic as a benchmark for reaffirming the value of human security. I highly acknowledge that this new approach to human security provides the policy framework for addressing Anthropocene, the planetary challenges in an equitable manner, not only in the field of the global health. And traditional approaches to human security have focused on the micro perspective of individuals and the communities as a contrast to the national security of sovereign states. It addressed the three universal freedoms, such as freedom from fear, freedom from want, and freedom to live with dignity, and formulated the concept of security relevant to each individual. This time, the idea is developed from a macro perspective on threats to human society in the modern age of scientific and technological development. The burden of human civilization on the global environment. Particularly, the report emphasizes the importance of solidarity in addition to the traditional two pillars of human security, human protection and human empowerment, which are in demand for the universal health coverage concept of leaving no one else behind. The challenges of infectious diseases is not the problem of one country or region. However, it needs to be addressed at the global level. This distribution of vaccines and treatments must also be emphasized with a sense of solidarity, rather than countries giving the priority to their own countries. Furthermore, the report notes the importance of three pillars of protection, empowerment, and solidarity in new international cooperation efforts to deal with the future pandemic outbreaks and the need for global governance structures that ensure that the most vulnerable are not undermined. We hope that these recommendations will be widely disseminated through this global launching event so that these recommendations can reach policymakers as well as civil societies in all countries and be reflected in actual policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. Achim, I'm just reminding myself of the title of our special report, New Threats to Human Security in Anthropocene, Demanding Greater Solidarity. That is part of the new generation of framing. Can you talk to us more about this framing, the new generation of framing, and then the utility of doing that? Should it be just a philosophical way of thinking about, let's rethink human security? There's more to it than that. Can you walk us through that? Because I know the practicality of this report is really important to you.
Let me perhaps use two examples. The first one is, if you take the story of development, it is in large part a history where the generation of our parents, usually through their efforts, their ingenuity, would leave their children in a better position to move forward, whether it was materially or with education or with the ability to explore new boundaries. The strange thing is we are probably the first generation, and this is being experienced in highly industrialized countries. In fact, it was something that was debated during the US election 5 years ago, where in a sense, parents feel, and certainly children and young people are sensing, that what they're being left with is actually potentially worse than the conditions that their parents had available to themselves. So here is an interesting, very practical way in which solidarity needs to be expanded. It's an intergenerational responsibility that in part is defined by this relation between people and the planet. If you take climate change, it's not only about carbon emissions in the atmosphere, it's about the fact that in 8 years' time, we will probably pass a point where the next generation has no choice anymore to reverse a higher than 1.5 degree global warming. So here is a very practical illustration of how we have to expand that notion of solidarity. And this is why young people are increasingly restless, because they can see the generation of their parents struggling with this. Another example is if you take the pandemic. the reflex was to turn inwards and to look after oneself. And yet in so doing, we laid the very foundations for actually being in a prolonged pandemic. And again, this ability of a tiny little virus to disrupt the entire world in literally a matter of months is something that we used to watch in science fiction movies, right? Or, you know, some sort of Hollywood view of a dystopian future. And despite the leadership of wonderful people such as Senator Takemi, who for years have spoken to the world about the linkages between human health and the vulnerability of the way our economies, our development was moving, we were not able to cope. Even in the wealthiest nations, our health systems were close to collapsing, and some they in fact did. And yet we struggled to find within ourselves this notion of solidarity that first of all sees that others who are much less well off actually need our help. And secondly, that in helping others, we are helping ourselves. Now, these are things that we sometimes learn in Sunday school, but actually in the modern world, these are not things that you hang on the wall and, you know, remember your youth when somebody spoke to you and inspired you. It actually has to become the operating system of our time. And unfortunately, much of the energy we spend in our international relations today is driven more by what divides us. And this is one of the perhaps important other reminders when we talk about solidarity. Solidarity doesn't mean you agree with everything somebody else does, nor do you have to be friends with them. But there is a common humanity that is not just some abstract philosophical concept. In the 21st century, oddly enough, it becomes a matter of survival. And I think this is where, you know, in a very practical way, the development program of the United Nations is, in my mind, not something that is redundant, because we once thought development aid would help countries to industrialize and then everything would be fine. It is actually potentially an expression of how we will invest in one another in the coming decades. Development cooperation is no longer something that is measured only in economic indices, whether it's GDP growth, whether it is people living below the poverty line. It is about how we invest in the ability to develop together with 8-9 billion people on this planet. And so solidarity takes on very direct and very practical implications on the ground in our communities, but also at the level of global politics.
So I'm going to go back to Madam President and Senator Takemi. You were co-chairs of the advisory panel, an eminent advisory panel. So I know you work well together. I have questions for you from our audience. I'm going to get you to tag teams. I can see your relationship as co-chairs. You have 30 seconds each for each of these questions, so no dilly-dallying around, all right? Okay, let me start. Madam President, this question comes from Transparency International Nigeria. Thank you for the question. Human security and human development go hand in hand. We know that one of the biggest obstacles to human development is corruption. How are human security and corruption linked, in your opinion, Madam President? In 30 seconds, please.
Well, it's going to be hard to say it in 30 seconds, but they are very close, interrelated. The more corruption, the less access to information, the less possibilities to empower people, the less possibilities to agency, which is one of the pillars that the new generation of human security advocates for. So corruption must be tackled through, again, more agency, empowering people, accessing the information, and also using for good one of the existential also threats that we included in the report, which is technology. In this case, technology proves to be a positive instrument to tackle corruption and to improve, in consequence, human security and uncertainty among the people.
Oh, beautifully done, co-chair. Thank you so much for that. Senator Takemi, you have a high standard to keep up. This question: developed countries withheld access to vaccines and are the most contributors to climate change. How do we ensure accountability of the West, Senator?
Yes, this pandemic of the COVID-19 teaches us no one can be safe before everybody can be saved. Now, this is a real important lessons we have learned through this whole the experiences of this pandemic to overcome. And this is the cause of the new kind of the solidarities among us, not only for policymakers, but also for the ordinary students. And this is the wonderful new political momentums. We have to utilize those new momentum as a political leverage to design new global health governance architectures. And therefore, this report will give us the wonderful new approaches, which can be the very drastic, but very also the possible, the approaches we can share in order to save ourselves beyond all the national boundaries. So I really emphasize the importance that how we can utilize the impact of the pandemic of COVID-19 as a positive manner. Thank you.
Achim, I don't want to leave you out of the rapid fire section, so I have one for you, the final question, and very briefly, please. How to deal with human security in conflict countries like Afghanistan and Myanmar? That comes from our audience watching right now.
Well, I think we're all struggling with it because the implosion of Afghanistan was so sudden and so comprehensive. And I think perhaps the most important thing is we have to go back to where people survive. I think if you want to deal with a crisis and conflict, you have to go to the origins of what enables people to either survive or to give up. And so much of, I think also UNDP's advocacy towards the response to Afghanistan is to not only treat it as a humanitarian emergency, but actually begin to try and work with stabilizing people's economy. The people's economy is where people earn their daily living in order to be able to feed their family. And I think this is another moment where solidarity is extremely difficult in terms of the international political arena. And yet, if we don't step forward, we are simply contributing to an escalating situation. And this is where wisdom is called for, sometimes less emotion and more practical thinking. So in a nutshell, try and help people to help themselves to survive in such a crisis. Then you can begin to build forward and look to the future again.
Thank you so much, Achim Steiner, Senator Keizo Takemi, and President Laura Chinchilla. I really appreciate you. So today, February the 8th, was the publication day for the 2022 Special Report on Human Security. So the baby has been born. Pedro Conceição, Director of the Human Development Report Office for the UNDP. What do you want to tell us about your baby? I know it was a team effort. You didn't do it all by yourself, but please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Femi. Indeed, it was a team effort. And first of all, I wanted to thank once again the high-level advisory panel, Senator Takemi and Laura Chinchilla, for their wonderful support. Listening to the conversation thus far, I think it's very hard not to be puzzled as we live in the richest, most technological advanced and educated societies in history. But we've heard that we confront a number of tensions and conflicts, as we just heard from your last question to Achim, Femi. So what the report found, which was a surprise, frankly, to all of us working on it, is that what we see in the headlines is really the tip of a vast iceberg of human insecurity. As we've heard, our report finds that even before COVID-19 hit, 6 out of every 7 people around the world were feeling insecure about many aspects of their life. And this has worsened as a result of COVID-19. We also heard that some of the highest increases in perceptions of human security actually happen in countries with very high levels of Human Development Index. And so it's hard to explain and understand what's behind it, but the report found a very strong association between people feeling insecure and low levels of trust in one another. And this independently of where people lived or how satisfied they were with their lives. And so I think here is the first important message of the report that I would like to highlight, because it suggests that enhancing human security may actually offer a route towards rebuilding trust, which is essential in our lives, in our world today, because low levels of trust make everyday life difficult and lower the effectiveness of laws and their enforcement. But the report digs deeper and tries to answer the question of why are people feeling insecure. And it argues that there are actually very objective and good reasons for people to feel insecure. And they result from the intersection of the Anthropocene reality, about which we've already heard quite a bit, with inequalities. We believe that the Anthropocene is a useful frame to bring together a range of challenges that may seem disparate, ranging from COVID-19 to climate change and biodiversity loss. So these are all manifestations of a broader process of planetary change that is making for a more dangerous world. And where dangers, and this is the second side of the coin here, carve deeper inequalities between those that are contributing to these dangers and those suffering the consequences from them. And the report documents how this is playing out through disruptions to food systems, for instance, the forced displacement of people, the emergence of new health threats, the amplification of triggers of violent conflict, the destruction of physical and natural capital, the erosion of the ability of people to work, and what we call a continued assault on human dignity through discrimination based on race, gender, and sexual orientation. So let me conclude with highlighting what the report suggests as a way forward, and some of these points have already been mentioned, so I can be brief. First of all, it reaffirms the importance of pursuing human security strategies to protect and empower people. This was something that Sadako Ogata and Amartya Sen already 20 years ago defended. But it suggests two extensions. First, that we have a blind spot in measuring progress and assessing policies by focusing on well-being achievements alone and neglecting agency. Agency means that we often see, neglecting agency, that means that we often see people as patients and fail to recognize the ability of people to be agents that can reason and act to shape different futures. And second, and this has been mentioned already quite a bit, in addition to the empowerment and protection of individuals, human security strategies, we argue, should seek to advance solidarity. So solidarity is understood not as optional charity or something that subsumes the individual to the interests of a collective, but as a recognition of our interdependence in one another, but also between people and planet, very much also as recognized in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Thank you, Femi.
Thank you so much, Pedro. I know you'll be staying around for our full global launch. So if we have more questions for you, I may well bring you back so you can answer them. All right, but for now, thank you very much. The framing of the special report on human security is a new generation of framing human security. So with that in mind, I want to make sure that you hear from the next generation, a new generation, a young voice. Have a listen.
Hello, everyone. This is Nadine Khawle, a young leader and global goals advocate from Lebanon. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for joining your efforts for the global launch of the UNDP Human Security Report. I'm glad to join Mr. Steiner and your excellencies to explore new solutions for threats faced by every human being on Earth, including the youth. From chronic and persistent poverty to violence, to human trafficking, to socioeconomic instabilities, climate change, international terrorism, the new health threat, the COVID-19, the youth remain mainly hit by these global challenges. For many young men and women, today's world is an insecure place, full of threats on many levels, which greatly impose significant hardships for the Sustainable Development Agenda. The question here remains, what is required from us to change this reality? Well, we require greater integration of activities across the United Nations system in partnership with others like government, public and private sectors, educational institutions, civil society organizations, and youth-focused groups. I also believe acting on single issue is not enough. The youth, and in particular the marginalized group, need to feel safe in all aspects of their lives, have income, opportunities, and chances to attain their well-being, and feel that their rights and dignity are fully respected in inclusive societies. Well, if policies and legislations are not being taken into account, climate change will continue to affect people's life. The number of forcibly displaced people, including the youth, will continue to double, and the number of youth affected by conflicts will continue to rise. From this platform today, as a youth coming from a country that is facing huge socioeconomic and political instabilities, I call for more solidarity, empowerment, protection for the youth agenda in all the countries, while encouraging more creativity, innovation, and commitment to peace, human rights, and sustainable development. Do we have hopes? Yes, we have. The 2030 Agenda is an ambitious set of multidimensional objectives that inform actions at all levels. The 2030 Agenda is our hope. I here call countries. We have a to-do list. Yes, the global goals are the world's to-do list. Let's work together toward a better world and more ambitious, youthful future. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you so much, Nadine Howler. Appreciate you. So if you look on the forward of this 2022 special report on global security, you will see a forward that has been written by the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. It's a little phrase that jumped out at me. This is the phrase. The report offers a way forward to tackle today's interconnected threats. A way forward to tackle today's interconnected threats. That is where I'm going to go to and unpack with our panel. Panel, it is so good to have you, to see you, to hear from you. I'm just going to say hello to you one by one and then get you to greet our audience and tell them what you're bringing to the table and your official job title. Professor Caldor, nice to see you. Professor Anne-Marie Slaughter, welcome. Professor Anne-Marie Goetz, good to have you. Abdoulaye Mar Dieye, wonderful to have you. If you've got a good distinct ear, you may see a little bit of a pattern between the names of our guests. That is just pure serendipity. So lovely to have you. Professor Caldor, Mary, first of all, please introduce yourself to our global launch audience. Tell them who you are, what you do, what you're bringing to this conversation briefly.
Well, my name's Mary Caldor, as you just said. I run a conflict research program at the London School of Economics, and I've done a lot of work over the years on conflict and on a human security approach to conflict. I've worked closely with the European Union in developing a human security approach to their external policy. And I'm also an activist. I've been involved as a peace activist, a human rights activist, an activist in conflict zones.
Good to have you. Professor Anne-Marie Slaughter, welcome to the conversation. Tell our audience who you are, what you're bringing to the table.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. So I was a law professor for 12 years working on international law and international relations and the individualization of international law. Very interested in human security back in the 1990s. And then became a dean at Princeton School of Public and International Affairs and worked for Hillary Clinton in the State Department, focusing on how to elevate development so that it was on the same level and got the same attention as diplomacy and defense. I now run New America, and I think I bring two things to this panel. One, in addition to foreign policy, I spend a lot of time writing about gender equality and elevating the value of care. Care is half of human nature. We do compete, absolutely, that's part of who we are, but we also connect to others. That is just as important to us as a full belly. And solidarity is about connecting to one another and to the earth, as we just heard. The last thing I bring is that for the past 9 years, I've focused on domestic policy as much as foreign policy. And so much of solidarity is what African Americans are talking about in the United States to get racial justice. It is an important domestic cultural tradition that we must tap into to inform the global debate.
Professor Anne-Marie Gertz is nodding along to your introduction, so that's a good sign. Anne-Marie, please introduce yourself. What are you bringing to the table?
Hi, everyone. I am a lecturer at New York University at the Center for Global Affairs. And I've spent many years working at the UN. For a long time, I was the head of the Peace and Security Policy section at UN Women, for example. What I bring to the table is a concern with feminist multilateralism and what it would mean to actually apply human security concepts to global governance. And the second thing that I bring to the table is many, many years of research on corruption, actually, and on how grassroots organizations can fight corruption, which has come up already in the questions and is highly relevant to the question of where did the trust go? So that's what I bring to the table, and also a strong interest in building and revitalizing social capital.
Oh, Anne-Marie Gertz, we have so many more questions about corruption. People are really fixated on that. So I'm going to make you work a lot, as much as time as we can make for you to talk about that. Abdoulaye Mar DA has already written notes. Mar, I don't know what you're writing already. What did you write down? How is that possible? You haven't even introduced yourself yet. What did you write down?
I wanted to share with you the spirit of winning, because I am calling from sunny Dakar, where Senegal has just won the African Cup of Nations. So
okay.
If you hear a lot of noises, it's not me. It's,
Yes, everybody from Senegal or who loves Senegal is celebrating right now, probably for the next month or so. Congratulations on your win. All right, so your introduction, back to work.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I am the special coordinator, or I am called the special coordinator for development in the Sahel, but I don't feel as neither special nor a coordinator. I feel I am an evangelist. As you may know, that we are surrounded with all the threats that we are talking about this morning. You can find them in the Sahel. My role is to be an evangelist and a pathfinder. And you know that evangelists, what they do, they try to find gospels to sing. And this report that has been put forward for me is a gospel that can help me navigate the complexities of the Sahel. And I like the template that Achim and the team put forward, and Pedro, to get out of the grooves that we are here. The template is yes, protection, yes, empowerment, but also solidarity. I would like to develop that when I intervene in the second round. Over to you.
Absolutely. Panel, I'm really intrigued by this bold claim that the report offers a way forward to tackle today's interconnected threats. Mary, do you want to get us started? When you were looking at the report, when you were thinking about what you wanted to pull out and share at this global launch, what did you decide to share with us?
Well, thank you very much. And thank you I'm very happy to be here on this very important occasion. You know, I think what was so striking about the report were these conclusions about the spread of human insecurity. And my concern is that insecurity doesn't necessarily, we've been told it doesn't produce trust, nor does it necessarily produce a human security approach. I think what we've seen so far is that insecurity has produced a very dangerous new socio-political phenomenon that we see in Trump's America, We see it in Putin's Russia. We see it in Bolsonaro's Brazil. We see it in the UK in the Brexit phenomenon. And it's a sort of dangerous combination of a new type of populist authoritarianism, of crony capitalism, which I would say to the audience is basically systemic corruption. People making money out of the state who want to stay in power, of nationalism and racism, and also extreme patriarchy, trying to reverse the gains that have been made in gender terms and in LGBT terms. And, you know, as somebody who studies conflict, this is not a new phenomenon for me. It's the phenomenon we observed in the Balkans. It's the phenomenon we observe in Syria, in Assad's Syria. It's the phenomenon we observe in Congo. And I could go on. And what is so terribly dangerous about this is that these are forever wars. These are wars that are really difficult to stop. And I think Achim, the administrator, made a very important point. You know, there's a moment when things are going to get out of control. These are not wars in a traditional sense of two sides trying to gain something. They're wars in which various groups make money, spread extremist ideologies through violence. And so this is what I think is so incredibly dangerous about this moment, but it's also where I think the new generation of human security could be incredibly important. And I was thinking about it, and I think these three components, protection, solidarity, and empowerment, do actually represent a way forward. You know, what we need is an alternative international security system that's an alternative to geopolitics. It's a multilateral system. And I mean, geopolitics is part of the fermenting of endless tension that you see in these authoritarian type regimes. And I, you know, these three components for me are very reminiscent. Most people are too young to remember the Helsinki Agreement of 1975, but it's what I think began the end of the Cold War. And so one component, protection, is all about preventing war. It's all about protecting people in conflict zones and putting protection before winning, before killing enemies. It's all about arms control arrangements and disarmament and trying to reach confidence building measures to stop wars. So that's one element. The second element, solidarity, I think is hugely important to cooperate even with people, even with the difficult leaders that we face. We have to cooperate on climate change. We have to cooperate, we've heard, on the pandemic. And actually, we have to cooperate on conflicts. The huge difference we see in Syria, where the UN is not present, and conflicts in Africa, which are horrible, but are not quite as bad because the UN is present, is really important. And the UN can be only present if we cooperate. And the third component, empowerment, has everything to do with human rights, which people are talking about much less in the international arena. It has everything to do, I think the only alternative to this socio-political phenomenon is what I call civicness. And civicness is not just a powerful civil society. It's about local areas that have refused to be part of the phenomenon and that try to do things for ordinary people. It's about doctors and nurses who just, and teachers who take their jobs seriously and really want to help patients, whoever they are, wherever they come from. So promoting civicness is very much linked to promoting human rights, to trying to create space for civicness in conflict, to taking justice seriously, to taking the International Criminal Court seriously and not affected by double standards. So these are the things that I would like to do to take this very important report forward. And I just end by saying, I think human security is in the air again. I'm hearing it on all sides, including among the military. And so I think this could make a very key contribution.
Anne-Marie Slaughter has been writing on her notebook for the past 3 minutes. What did you write down?
So I'm taking notes. I'll start by saying I agree that human security is back in the air. This kind of change takes a long time. I did start my career as an international lawyer. Human rights, the Declaration is 1948, but it takes 20 years even to get treaties, and it takes 20 years after that to have courses taught. So we should not think that because the International Criminal Court or responsibility to protect or human security didn't take off immediately, that they are not critical pillars. But I'll say what I was also writing, and one was to underline Mary's critical point about great power competition. As I look at it, the end of the Cold War means the end of great power competition between the United States and the Soviet Union in the 1990s, and there's kind of hyperpower unipolar moment, but also a lot of room for the kinds of things that said, let's get beyond states and look at human beings. What I see around me now is a foreign policy establishment that is thrilled to be back in the era of power competition. In the United States, the Democrat, it was Trump who said, we're back to great power competition, and he wanted to go back to the 19th century. He didn't want anything to do with international institutions of any kind. But the Biden administration is equally comfortable with, US versus China. We're going to win the 20th century. What good does winning do against any nation if we all go under? If we all go under from climate change, from disease, from all these threats. So I think it's very important for us to push back against the idea that great power competition is just the natural way of the world. It may be the natural way of traditional foreign policy makers who are mostly men, mostly white, at least in the global north, and we have to push beyond that. I'll say a couple more things just about solidarity, because it really struck me that solidarity is the word that Heather McGhee, who is a very distinguished advocate and thinker in the United States, an African-American woman, she wrote a book called The Sum of Us that talks about the solidarity dividend, that we have to move away from zero-sum thinking toward positive sum thinking. Basically, she was saying when people of color in the United States gain, so too do white people. And I would say the same globally. When the global South gains, so too does the global North. This is not in this nature, in this era of global threats, a who gets and who doesn't get. So positive sum thinking. Another book, again by an African-American thinker, advocate, former Navy veteran, by Theodore Johnson, called When the Stars Begin to Fall, Overcoming Racism and Renewing the Promise of America, also talks about solidarity. And for him, it's moving away from the relentless focus on individualism that is at the heart of capitalism. And I believe we can move to an economic system, I don't care if we call it capitalism or something else, that privileges families, that thinks about family economic security and community well-being, in addition to creating room for individual thriving. So that's what I was writing down. I think solidarity is about positive sum thinking, about privileging our desire to connect to others in family and community. And that this is a moment where we should demand that the human and the state be considered side by side.
I want to bring Ma back into the conversation. Ma, as we were getting ready for this panel, you asked if you could create havoc, but in a very polite way. So yes. I am intrigued as to what havoc you're about to unleash. Please go ahead.
Maybe two positive havoc. You remember when I introduced myself, I said that I was an evangelist, and I was looking for a gospel to guide me, and I found that this report is a kind of a gospel. But I think what UNDP has done is even deeper than that. It's a tectonic revolution how do we do development otherwise? For me, in the Sahel and in other theaters of operation, development failed and the insecurity did grow because our model of development is elite capture and governance capture. And we didn't give space to the people and the citizens. And by the way, I always say that we have to rewrite the Charter of United Nations because the word citizen is not there. We have to rewrite it. Now, why this is a powerful revolution, we have to shift from that elite capture and the government capture to people's capture, or to people's agency. That's why I like the notion of agency, people's agency. When I talk to the young people in the Sahel, they tell me, we don't want to hear the international community and the government referring to us as beneficiaries. We are agents. We are agents of change, and this is what we are doing in the United Nations in the Sahel. Empower them as agents of change. Coming back to the algorithm that Achim and Pedro put forward to drive us out of the groups of insecurities. I like that triangle. Of course, we have been focusing on the responsibility to protect. We are adding now the duty to empower. But I like that the third part, which I call the hypothesis of that triangle, which is the imperative of solidarity. And for me, in the Sahel, is extremely important. In the Sahel, we talk about geopolitics. This is where you have an overcrowded, toxic geopolitics, which is destroying whatever we do in terms of the two other sides of the triangle, whatever we do in terms of empowerment, whatever we do in terms of supporting, protecting people, because there is a lack of international solidarity playing in a cohesive fashion, it is very toxic. I was saying that I am going to be provocative because in the Sahel, our very historic and cultural construct is solidarity. For instance, well, we do not sanction neighbors. I believe that the sanction imposed on Mali, I mean, don't get me wrong, I am against military powers, but I think we should have reflected, building on that sacred principle in the Sahel, which is solidarity. Solidarity is what the Sahel can teach the world. Diplomacy is based on solidarity. And I salute what Emmanuel Macron is doing in Ukraine. That's the way to go. Still the power of diplomacy, the power to build space for solidarity. If we do that, that's why I call solidarity the hypothesis of that triangle that came out of this report. This is where we have to invest. But last but not least, if I were to write a sequel of the report, I would add a chapter on the change of behavior. The report is focusing on policies, but I think the future is a change of behavior. As we shift from the Holocene to the Anthropocene, we have two shifts that we have not done. We have to shift from ego beings to eco beings. That we haven't done. But we have to shift from solitary beings to solidarity beings. So there is a change of behavior of human beings if we want really to live in this Anthropocene age. But this is fascinating. Really, congratulations to Achim and to Pedro. Over to you, Femi.
Ma, that is probably the most difficult thing to change our behavior. It takes, I would say, decades and decades to change our behavior. So maybe that's why that chapter isn't in there. Panel thoughts?
I don't think so, because look how fast we've changed our behavior with the pandemic. You know,
well, some of us have.
I understand, but still, if you had said 2 years ago that many people would start working from home, CEOs who had been saying, no way, that can never happen. Suddenly you can.
Maria Slaughter, I absolutely agree with that. It was a massive shock. It took down the closing down of the world economies. That is not necessarily a change of behavior, is it? I mean, that's a catastrophe. I'm talking about I'm talking about smaller baby steps. Maria, I completely agree with you. We went from 1 month when we were all going into the office to another month when nobody wanted to get on a bus and we all walked and got our bikes out. That was huge. But
But Femi and Anna-Marie, that's a
Are you suggesting
behavior.
we shock people into change of behavior?
But that's a default change. I'm calling for a proactive change of behavior. If we keep being defaulted and changing, well, we will not lead the world. We have to be proactive and change our behavior, and that is missing in our template.
You know, in the past, major wars have always been moments for changes of behavior. And I think we can say two things. I mean, one is these wars were experimental moments when often people did the wrong things and they lost. And, you know, in a way, I think there are two things to say about that. I mean, in a way, the pandemic was like a war. It was an existential shock. But the other problem that we have is that the wars we have are not like that. The wars we have don't encourage change, or rather they encourage change in completely the wrong direction. And so, you know, thinking about how to bring about change, I mean, I do think the pandemic offers an opportunity, but we still haven't learned. We haven't taken the global necessity for dealing with vaccines. And in the case of conflicts, if we don't solve conflicts, we'll never solve the problem of COVID-19. You know, polio was supposed to have been eliminated in 2006, and it's reappeared in Afghanistan and in Congo. So we do have to seize this opportunity.
Professor Anne-Marie Gertz, I'm going to get you to come in here because I wanted everybody to have their moment, and then we're really going to open up debate. We have so many questions, and I know each of you, every time each of you speak, you're nodding and writing down notes. I know there's a lot to get into. Professor Anne-Marie Gertz, but you came with what? What did you want to be your takeaway, your mic drop moment? Go ahead.
Well, two things. One is, first of all, just we have to take advantage of this moment, because to the extent that COVID has triggered behavior changes and awareness of the transborder nature of the threats that we face, we can't lose this. And so the report is extremely timely. However, I do feel that it could spend a lot more time addressing the tools for institutionalizing human security. And I'll get to that in a second. The first point I wanted to make is that I wanted to pick up actually on something that Mary said about extreme patriarchy, because I think it is relevant to the issue of how hard it is to change behavior. There's a line in the report, just one little line, that says the subordination of women at the household level corresponds with instability at the national level. And this, of course, is a classic human security observation that, you know, systemic inequalities and injustice that are at the micro level actually have massive knock-on effects. So in particular, violence against women has massive knock-on effects. So feminists have always been very keen on human security, but they've also always been very skeptical about the prospects for really serious change via the patriarchal state. You know, in 1938, Virginia Woolf said, "As a woman, I have no country. I don't want a country. I cannot have my rights limited by a country." Because of course, oh, I think we've lost Mar. No, there he is. Because of course, national sovereignty, the principle of national sovereignty, is always invoked to wipe out international discussion about women's rights, as well as, of course, to act as a shield to disguise things like genocide, persecution of minorities, etc. So I do want to underline this point about patriarchy, because I think that this kind of politics of masculinist restoration is what we might be seeing happening on the streets right now in the capital of my country, which is Canada. Yep. So the Australian sociologist Raywin Connell 20 years ago said, hardline masculine fundamentalism goes together with a marked anti-internationalism. So, you know, the point I want to make is that a really serious push at renewing and strengthening multilateralism is needed for human security. That was expressed in the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report. And I think it could be actually stressed more in this report. So the second point I want to make is, you know, the report is good. And by the way, this is a flaw that the report recognizes is inherent to the concept of human security. It's great on the why. Why do we need to change? It's great on the what has to change. But, you know, it's not so clear on the how. And I actually wanted to, sort of put this to other panelists as well. There are some tools that are kind of expressive of human security. One of those is the responsibility to protect. And that went, that one, as we know, it's a balloon that popped, that deflated, and it actually could be revived, rebuilt, strengthened. I would have loved to have seen that discussed in this report. How do we revive this notion of a responsibility to protect and prevent atrocities regardless of national boundaries? Is there any way we can do this? So that would be one. I would say there's others, kind of hard issues that really could be tackled straight on if we're serious about human security. Refugee law and policy. Asylum is another one. Of course, climate action, that's in there. And then corruption. Since everybody, there's a lot of questions about corruption. Corruption is of course, the way we get crony capitalism and rule of oligarchs. And our international tools for tackling corruption are puny. They're puny. The only thing that actually really seriously pushes back corruption is people on the streets mobilizing, demanding a right to information, demanding answers. But for that, you need democracy. You need to be able to vote the miscreants out. And so that's actually another really serious issue. So I don't know, it just seems to me it might be really useful to really challenge what tools do we have to make human security real?
I'm just looking at one of the questions that came in on corruption, Anne-Marie. It's kind of backing up what you were saying here. And it's just looking at organized crime as a threat to human dignity and security. I consider corruption is the biggest threat to human security, human dignity, health system, and planet. Ma, did you say I agree?
Yes, I do agree. Let me footnote on what Anne-Marie said, and I have been struggling with that. How do we evolve the notion of responsibility to protect the R2P since Kofi Annan put it forward? A great idea, but still hung on gravity. I think we have to shift from the responsibility to protect to an accountability to protect. Protecting people is a global public good. It behooves all of us to protect, and that accountability is not there. I think we have to shift and make it harder make it more practical to implement. Coming on corruption, and talking about corruption, and I say when we talk about weak fiscal space in the region that I'm dealing with, it's illicit financial flow, it's the money going out. 6 times or 7 times ODA, for instance, is coming out of the continent. But how do we deal with it? Look, we are criminalizing drug trafficking. I think all the constitution has to criminalize corruption. You have to have harder measure to close the tap. This is what is bleeding our economies on the ground. Unless we do it, it will be a kind of sunk cost. Whatever you invest in the Sahel or in Africa, it will be like the Antonio the Danaid, the Danaid vessels. It will get out. So dealing hardly with corruption by criminalizing it, I think is the way to go.
Anne-Marie Gertz, you're looking very thoughtful. You look like you're about to say something. Go ahead and say it.
I might have been misleading. To be honest, I've had a lump in my throat ever since I heard Achim Steiner's opening remarks, because these problems are really serious. And when he described the dark logic of what's going on, when the most privileged in the world feel the most insecure, it is really troubling. So if I looked thoughtful, it was only because I was reflecting back on that. But Mar, I agree with you, that corruption, needs to be brought front and center. And I would just put in there, what would be really good to see would be kind of a much more serious kind of, I know there's global conventions on anti-corruption, and actually they're not very powerful, but to see global action to close tax havens, to end the legal, because you mentioned criminalizing corruption. Well, corruption is criminal in most places, but there are legal forms of corruption, including you're allowed to hide all your money and not contribute to national welfare while you benefit from education systems and roads that you didn't pay tax for. That kind of thing would be really useful in terms of also rebuilding trust in governments, so that you could see that actually everybody who should be paying tax is doing so.
I'd like to add something on this, because I think I agree with absolutely everything Anne-Marie has said, but I think corruption gets hidden by geopolitics, and that's what we're seeing in Ukraine at the moment. The democracy movement in Ukraine was an anti-corruption movement. The reason the Russians wanted to destabilize was that they really feared that democracy would lead to transparency, and they were all interlinked. And we're all talking about NATO expansion versus Russian fears and not addressing this central issue. And we're all very implicated. I mean, in my own country, so much of the Russian dark money is going through the City of London and the property market, and we're not dealing with it. So just 100% to agree with you. But also to say we have to talk differently about international relations.
Yes.
That is the key. That is absolutely the key, that we have to call out constantly the two paradigms now, that there's great power conflict, there's statism, there's everything focused on traditional interstate violence versus a global paradigm that says, look, more people, far more people are dying from violence, everything from violence in the home to the kind of violence you see in the Sahel, to organized crime, to use the numbers, as this report does, to say the scale of this violence, the scale of these threats is every bit as big as, suddenly the United States versus Russia again, or the United States versus China, or any of the regional conflicts, and call it out all the time that the geopolitical frame advantages elites. I mean, Mar, I was listening to you when you talked about elite and government capture. That's exactly right, because that paradigm privileges about 30 states and their leaders, and they get to decide what happens in the world in foreign ministries, as opposed to a world in which all of us can actually contribute to addressing these problems in our own countries and globally.
All right, panel, I have 4 minutes, one more question, and 4 panelists. That means you have a minute each. This is perfect. Everyone gets to share the last question. I love this last question. Thank you, attendees. Your questions have been thoughtful, insightful, and really helped drive our global launch. Really appreciate you. All right, this question is for everyone, parentheses, including you, Femi. All right, so how can we ensure that the concept of human security reaches the general public? It seems to be back in the conversation in policy circles, universities, but is it still a distant concept to regular people, to the masses? Ma,
I'll start teaching it at school. At the very basic level of age, it has to be inoculated into young generations so that when they grow up, we'll have a word in peace.
A human security class, series of classes?
Absolutely.
From kindergarten upwards? All right.
Absolutely.
I like that. Nice and simple and straightforward. Anne-Marie Slaughter.
So I would tie it to agency, as the report does, and I would tie agency to technology. And I would argue that why are we hearing this again today? Well, it's partly the nature of the threats and the interconnected threats, and the fact that pandemics and climate change cannot be addressed just by governments, no matter what they do. But I'd also say, look, the digital technology that creates so many dangers and that empowers some so dramatically over others and widens in it, and that distorts our democracy, that same technology is providing individual agency in a way we have never seen, right? That suddenly people really can create youth movements like the Sunshine Movement, much harder to imagine doing if you don't have digital technology, that can bring together women in the Me Too movement. So I think the way to emphasize human security is to talk to young people about their agency, but how do they use that agency for good? And that agency for good has to be tied to a concept of solidarity, both nationally and globally. And that is captured by the idea of human security. So I think we can link these together in a way that is both simple, but also comes back to the idea that, hey, I can do something about this. It's not just my government.
Mary.
I think what's interesting is that human security is a concept that activists tend to like. And you see it in the peace movement, you see it in Black Lives Matter. So you do see that concept being used, and it's also a concept which can provide a platform for communication. The fact that people in the military like it, the fact that people in government, in some governments like it. Really oddly, I was just asked by NATO to write a brief on human security, which just shows. So it provides a platform for discussion, but I think you're absolutely right. It hasn't gone beyond that platform to the general public, and the general public is very vulnerable to the geopolitical statements that politicians make, which is why you find even left-wing or liberal politicians tend to use geopolitical rhetoric because they think that goes down well with audiences. And so I think that's the big challenge, and the suggestions that both Anne-Marie and Ma have made would be really helpful in addressing that challenge.
Anne-Marie Gertz, you get the almost final word, the penultimate word. Go ahead.
Very quickly, I actually misheard Mar, so I'm going to make my answer what I thought he said. So Mar, I thought you said by start pitching human security, teaching it at school. I thought you said by pitching human security as cool. And that's going to be my answer.
take that version. That's the media version.
I like that one too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So of course
Yeah.
I know how to do that, but there's no time for me to tell you how. So
and that is a tease and a half. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Mary Calder, Anne-Marie Gertz, Anne-Marie Slaughter, Ma D.A. Thank you, panel. You really got us thinking about this framework, this new agenda, next gen framework for human security. Really appreciate you. All of the speakers that have been involved in today's global launch. If you've been following in this whole session, quickly scroll up before I end and you can click on the link and then you can read the report for yourself. It's about 183 very interesting pages. All right, so I'm giving you a little bit of time to do that. And I will just give you the title. You can also find the link on Twitter as well. And the Twitter handle for the human development is @HDRUNDP. All right, have you scrolled? Have you clicked on the link yet? Thank you so much, speakers. Thank you so much, attendees, for joining us today for the 2022 special report, New Threats to Human Security in the Anthropocene, Demanding Greater Solidarity. Thank you for your time. Take care, everybody.